Today, in current events from a Christian perspective, why does pride go before a fall? Today, we have not one but two high-profile pastors who have been disqualified from ministry in the last couple of weeks. What is going on out there? Then we check in on Disney's latest Star Wars series, also full of pride, and see how that is going. As a preview, we look at Disney's newest foray into the Star Wars universe to uncover the secret ritual of female witches who seem to be lesbian, who knows, except they are, and they have immaculately conceived children. That is literally what they wrote into the script of this new show, and it is as terrible as you can imagine. Finally, we hear from a somewhat famous celebrity who is so fed up with California, she's leaving for greener pastures, but is she part of the problem? Spoiler, yes. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. Welcome back to Church Public. I'm your host, as always, Matt Odegaard. Really appreciate you stopping by today. A little bit of technical difficulty there. I think it should be okay. We'll see how things go. But as always, appreciate you stopping by. If this is helpful to you, and I hope it is, you can leave a comment, review, share, subscribe, do all the things. You know what to do. Hit the 5 stars and leave a post, whatever you got to do. If you want to support this, you can go to churchpublic.com/support. That really helps. This is a labor of love designed to help you understand the Christian perspective and help you live out your faith, because my goodness, is it a wild world out there. So I want to help you do that. We're going to look at some news today. Obviously, to jump right in, I do have to pause. I actually wrote this about a day and some ago, and that was before this presidential debate. And depending on when you're listening to this, likely that has already happened. So the presidential debate has happened, and my goodness, that was, I want to say train wreck, in the sense of you just can't look away. And I'll go back and say, if you have not watched the presidential debate and you're only seeing clips online, I know it's probably excruciating, but I would highly encourage you watching the whole thing, because you will get the context for what is really going on with each of the candidates and really in America more broadly. And I think that's important for you to understand. Now, I did not spend any time pulling clips together for this particular episode because I had already planned on some other content and want to get to that instead. However, I will just say, it is very clear that Biden is unfortunately struggling with some health issues that are not allowing him to process clearly. And I could say a lot more there. I'm not going to. The bottom line is you have the choice in November at this point between two people. Both are not perfect. However, one of them wants to have full abortion on demand, no limits at all. And one of them had not the best answer about abortion, but at least had some limits on it, and has, I think rightly taken credit for overturning Roe v. Wade, which is, again, really, really important. And we just passed the 2-year mark on that, which is fantastic. Okay, so I'm not going to spend a ton of time going on that. I think I have some thoughts. I think there's some things that are going to happen. I think in the Democratic National Convention, which is coming up, you will see a switch, if not before, on who the Democratic nominee for President of the United States of America is. But that's going to wait to be seen. I'm sure we'll be talking about that in a bit. And if I want to make the time to pull some clips together, send me a message if that's what you want to see. I'm happy to do that, but they're going around all over the internet, all over the social medias, and don't necessarily feel like I need to add to that necessarily. But I definitely have some thoughts about it. So there's only so much time. You just tell me what you want to hear. What I would like to talk about is pride, because that's what I structured this entire thing about. In fact, I'm even going to start with Proverbs 16:18. I think this is important to know, to read. I've always got my Bible here next to me. I encourage you to read yours as well. This is Proverbs 16:18. I was talking with a friend of mine earlier this week, and we were listening to another pastor and listening to some things, and the pastor said, pride goes before, and my friend said a fall, and then the pastor kind of paused there and said, it's actually before destruction. And So we shorten this sometimes. We shorten, this is Proverbs 16:18. Pride goes before destruction and a haughty spirit before a fall. And so we shorten that, and rightly so. And it does make sense to shorten it. Pride goes before a fall. However, to read it in its entirety from the Bible, pride goes before destruction. Destruction. I think that's even more serious than a fall. And I think that's important to note and to realize as we're working through this today. Pride is the original sin. It is the deadliest of sins because it makes you seem as God. What was the devil's promise to Eve and Adam? That was that you could be as God, that you would know what God knows. You would be like a God. That is the sin of pride. That's the original sin. That's the sin where we bear all the rest of this out of selfishness and everything else that comes out of that, envy and wrath and sloth and all this other stuff, which we don't need to necessarily get into, but when we're looking at sin and we're looking at that deadly sin of pride, I think it's important to understand. Now, depending on when you're listening to this, we're also still in the month of June on my calendar, which is the month of pride. So those two things, for me, for you, should be at odds. They are at odds, and yet this is the culture that we are currently in. It is not a biblical culture. It's just the reality of the culture that we're in, and so we need to understand it. And that culture comes with all of these do's and don'ts, things that you're allowed to do, things that you're not allowed to do. I actually brought you this. This is not a news story, but there's an update to it. I brought you this story a little bit ago, and we need to come back to it. And this is these scooter kids. Let's see, do I have that here? So this is these scooter kids, they were driving these electric scooters. Again, if you're listening, I'm showing a picture of the electric scooter kids. This kid's doing a wheelie over the Pride crosswalk that is painted on the road. And now they are in a lot of trouble for making skid marks on the Pride crosswalk that is on the road that you drive on with tires because it's a road. I know, I'm belaboring that point, but it should strike you as ridiculous to prosecute a person for doing skid marks on a road. And yet, this is the culture that we're in. And the reason that we're in this culture is it's a culture of pride, and this pride has rules, and the religion of pride has rules. The LGBTQ, AAIP, hashtag plus plus dollar sign, squiggly emoji religion has rules, and you are not allowed to mess with these rules. So here's the update to the story. And it has to do with what Lime, the scooter company, Lime like the fruit, but that's what the scooter company is called. They have new rules for their scooters. And I think this is interesting. I think it's interesting enough to bring back again. So to come back, June 5th, 19-year-old and two unnamed minors were arrested and booked in county jail for first-degree malicious mischief after leaving dark skid marks on the city's newest painted Pride mural, this Pride crosswalk. Again, if you're just listening, here it is on the screen if you are watching. So this is the Spokane, Washington Police Department. That was the statement they gave. Now, I do have to pause as well and say, do you remember right around the same time, this is a statue that was defaced by the pro-Palestine protesters. And again, if you're just listening, describing this statue, which is an historic statue, has spray paint all over it, flags all over it, all sorts of graffiti, all sorts of things all over it. And as far as I know, and I did check, no one that did any of the defacing on this statue has even been charged. So deface an historic statue that represents the history of America, fine. Deface a crosswalk where you literally drive a car, or in this case, a scooter, right to jail. Right to jail.
Right away.
Yeah. So, all right. So here's where the story gets just a little weirder. The owner of the scooters, the manufacturer, the brand, Lime, the Lime director of government relations, apparently there's a director of government relations for these scooters, Hayden Harvey told the National Desk that his company denounced such actions. He says, quote, "All of us at Lime condemn these vile acts in no uncertain terms at a time when our teams at Lime are beginning Pride celebrations around the globe." And this is June 5th. "It's disturbing to see the hate taking place in Spokane." He continues, "We will not let the hateful few spoil the joy of Pride in Spokane and are grateful for those working to make Spokane more welcoming for all." End quote. So this company, Lime, allows customers to use, if you've never used one of these electric scooters, right, you have an app, and the app unlocks the scooter, and then you can pay for it and then ride it around and whatever. Okay, so here's where the story gets a little weird. The scooter company now has established no-go zones over the Pride crosswalk where, quote, the scooter will gradually come to a stop if a rider approaches the area. That's the part that I want you to hold on to here. Yes, we talked about the blasphemy, like you're not allowed to do any blasphemy, any speaking against the God of the age, the spirit of the age, again, the pride, the LGBT, et cetera, et cetera. So number one, don't disrespect pride, because that is the God of the age, the religion of the age. It just is. But two, and here's something that's kind of a different point, but I think is important. Is it creepy to you that the electric scooter manufacturer has now said it is not allowed to drive on the mural? Like, they literally will shut the scooter off as you approach this mural. Is that creepy? Is that weird? I feel like that's weird. Three, and this may be the most important thing for you, does this make you think twice about an electric car powered by a computer that could be potentially controlled by the government? If not, who knows? All right, so we talked about pride, and it's important to understand. I'll just put it up again. You know, pride goes before destruction, haughty spirit before a fall. I think that's the thing that you need to hold on to, and that is that pride is not a good thing. All right, speaking of pride, and I don't know the full situation here, but there's a couple of situations that we have to look at. Those are Tony Evans and Robert Morris. And I don't know what's going on here. Some of the details we have, some of the details we don't, but we have to talk about this because they are high profile, and we talk about current events from a Christian perspective, and these happen to be Christian events that are important to understand what in the world is going on in the Christian world. So we know that several weeks ago now, Tony Evans stepped down from a church. A written statement he wrote, and he said, quote, a number of years ago, he felt short of the biblical standards espoused by his ministry due to sin, end quote. I believe he went on in his quote to say, the foundation of our ministry has always been our commitment to the Word of God as the absolute supreme standard of truth to which we conform our lives. When we fall short of that standard due to sin, we are required to repent and restore our relationship with God. I'll continue on in the quote here. A number of years ago, I fell short of that standard. This is Tony Evans talking. I am therefore required to apply the same biblical standard of repentance and restoration to myself I have applied to others. I have shared this with my wife, children, elders. They have placed their arms of grace around me. And he added, I have committed no crime. I did not use righteous judgment in my actions. So he went on to say he's stepping down. Now, we don't know what the sin is. And I hate to say it in this way, but I think we should. Maybe not me, like it doesn't personally matter to me per se. However, it should matter to his church, Oak Cliff Bible Fellowship, because he pastored there for a lot of years. And if it is not a crime, but a sin, and sufficient that he is not allowed to pastor there anymore, it appears that he probably should say what it is. If in fact there is any restoration available or possible, I think the church has a right to know what in the world is going on. And that really is the bottom line here. In the bucket of pride that we're talking about, no one is above the power of sin. Even you, even me, we're one step away from ruining your ministry, ruining your life, ruining your family by giving into temptation. However, of course, the good news is you can overcome the power of sin through Jesus. And the great news is you are never without the power of salvation through faith in Jesus Christ by grace alone. However, the category of pastor is a very specific category, and we're going to talk more about that in a moment with our next person that we're looking at, that not everyone can ascribe to, and not everyone should be in the pastorate. So there are qualifications there, and if you do not live up to those qualifications, measure up to those qualifications, as it were, you don't get to be in the pastorate. That's just how that works. And yet, apparently, and I don't know, it seems like Tony Evans wants to be restored at some point, but how can we know if he is restorable if we don't know what that thing is? I think that's an important part of this. Again, I don't personally care. I hope he gets restored. I hope he finds Jesus. I hope he is forgiven for his sins through the blood of Christ. We know he can be, but to what extent is the sin? At this point, we have no idea. Speaking of pastors, we're going to talk about Robert Morris, and he was the pastor of Gateway Church, one of the biggest, if not the biggest church in America. It is incredibly large, and Unfortunately, in the past couple of weeks, he also resigned from the pastor over the pastorate over a, I would say, rather terrible scandal. So some of this I learned from ChristianPost.com. You can go and listen and read that if you'd like to. But this is Robert Morris. If you didn't hear about this, we need to talk about it. And I would like to say too, this is terrible. Anytime. So we just heard one, and there's a second now. Anytime a public Christian falls, it's just a disaster. And it's a disaster because as a public Christian, you have a higher responsibility to not mess up. And I know you'll say, well, that's too much pressure. I agree it's a lot of pressure. I've been in the pastorate and I understand and have felt the pressure, but at the same time, you signed up to do this. And as we'll read in a moment, Paul makes it very clear, James talks about it too, that you should not want to be a pastor if you cannot stand under the pressure of being a pastor. Not everyone should be a pastor, and those that are need to live on a higher standard. In fact, I'll read this for you from Ephesians 5:3. Verse 3, it says, "But among you there must not be a hint of sexual immorality." How much is a hint? A hint, not a hint. Nothing. No one should be able to look and even say, well, that's a hint. Not even a hint of sexual immorality. And it goes on, any kind of impurity, greed, because these are improper for God's holy people. Now, Paul actually here is not just talking to pastors, he's talking to everybody, but especially the pastor should live an even more clear life of holiness as much as possible. Yes, I know. You could say, well, nobody's perfect. Agreed. 100% agreed. Nobody's perfect. I'm the worst of sinners. As Paul says himself, I agree. I am also the worst of sinners. However, there are levels of sin that have consequences in real life that you're not, you cannot do and be a pastor. That's what I'm saying. The consequences of sin in this life have actual consequences in real life, and some of them disqualify you from being a pastor. And that's the bottom line that we have to keep in mind. Yes, everyone can be equal at the cross. God can forgive all sins. Paul says in Romans, of course, none of us can make it on our own. We all sin. We all fall short. We're all terrible, 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 and cannot live up to God's standard. True. But now we're talking about Christian life on earth, and life in station on earth is your station a pastor, then you have higher responsibility than the normal Christian. That's just the way it is. You chose this, or I mean, you could say God chose you, whatever. We'll get into that later. So Paul cautions us in the strongest way possible about people who don't live like this, people who claim to be Christian yet are not acting like Christ. This is chapter 3, verse 6. "Let no one deceive you with empty words, for such things God's wrath comes on those who are disobedient." Verse 7, "Therefore don't be partners with them." Now, this is not saying that we should never associate with sinners. Of course, we are all sinners. I just mentioned that. Romans 3, I'm the worst of them. 1 Timothy 1:15. Yes. But again, James 3:1. You should not want to become a teacher unless you want to take on the burden of being a teacher. James 3:1. Go and read that. So this is why this is really important. And here is the consequence. This pastor, Robert Morris, was a pastor of potentially 100,000 people, and now 100,000 people who call Gateway Church home are messed up. I mean, that's the reality of it. And you're like, oh, Matt, that's too much responsibility to put on this one pastor. Listen, he chose to be this pastor. The church is that size. This is just the reality of the situation. You can get mad at me about it, but it's not about me. Again, I don't care. He is one of the most influential pastors in America, maybe even some would say the world, and the weekly attendance is claimed to be upwards of 100,000 people across all of their venues. So the influence that he has is great, and when you make a mistake, like the one we're going to hear about in a moment, the influence that you have is really great in the negative direction, and that is just tragic. That's why this is terrible. That's why we have to talk about it. That's why personally we have to guard ourselves in holiness, and that's why we have to understand that no one is above reproach. No one can avoid sinning. You need to have boundaries in place. You need to have accountability in place so that you should not be able to fall into things like that. Billy Graham, for instance, right? Billy Graham, whatever you think of him, Most people respect him. He had this rule where he wouldn't travel with a female. He wouldn't, go on in a car alone with a female. He wouldn't go to dinner with a female alone. And many thought, oh, that's too prudish. You're being, fundamental. You're being legalistic, whatever. But that boundary kept him from sexual impurity because, as we just read, no hint. That means no one could ever say, well, you went to dinner alone with them, so what did you do? You went on a trip alone with them, what did you do? He made sure his rule was that could never happen, so he could never be accused of that. And you could say, well, that's extreme. Sure, but did it keep him out of trouble in that way? Yes. Yes, it did. And that's the important thing here. So to get to this story of Robert Morris, this is what I have read. You can go and research this if you want. But to summarize it briefly, he resigned from this church, Gateway Church, and there was a woman who alleged Morris sexually abused her over multiple years, beginning in the 80s when she was 12. So that's really the bottom line, the terrible nature of this crime. Apparently, somewhere in the 80s, he admitted earlier when all of this happened to, quote, inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady, end quote, when he was in his 20s. He went on to say, this is a quote from him, quote, when I was in my early 20s, I was involved in inappropriate sexual behavior with a young lady in a home where I was staying. It was kissing, petting. It was wrong. The behavior happened on several occasions over the next few years. He went on to say, in March of 87, the situation was brought to light. It was confessed, repented of. I submitted myself to the elders of Shady Grove Church at the time and the young lady's father. They asked me to step out of ministry, which I did. And he said, since then, I've walked in purity and accountability, end quote. So here's the deal. Again, this is the fact that there are standards and there are different standards for pastors. There just are. This breaks those standards. First of all, even if Morris had only had an affair with a young lady while he was married, if we held to real biblical standards, go read Timothy, 1 Timothy, 2 Timothy, Titus, read some of Ephesians. Like, if we held to real biblical standards, he would not have been restored to ministry after only 2 years, maybe ever. Now, again, you can say, well, that's fundamentalist, it's legalistic. Sure, but if we stick to biblical standards of what a pastor is supposed to be, things like this would not happen. He would not be the pastor of a church of 100,000 with this dirty secret in his vault that apparently the quote-unquote young lady was only 12 when the abuse happened. So now we move into the category of not just a sin, but potentially a crime. Now, time will tell the truth will win out, but the bigger issue is, what in the world is going on in churches today that pastors are allowed to do things like this and even restored once they do? What was going on with the elders at the time? Did they not understand the situation? Why was he restored? Did they not ask enough questions? I don't know. I don't know the answers to any of these questions, but these are the questions that really do need to be asked. The bottom line is we need to pray for the victim in this situation, but even more so, we need to pray for our pastors, your pastor. You need to pray for your pastor. They're under intense pressure, not just from the culture, but also from the temptation of the world that exists, that all of us are subject to, and it can be a snare to any one of us at any time. So please do pray. Okay. That was a heavy one. This one is a little lighter. It's a little weirder. I don't know, but we're going to keep going. I know I probably jammed too many of these things in together, but this is just what I was thinking about as I was looking at some of these news articles over the past couple of weeks. So this is a person named Jillian Michaels. You may be familiar with her. I can't remember what show she was on. It was some weight loss show or something, so you might recognize her when she comes on. She's leaving California because she says it's crazy there. The question that I have as you're watching this is, yes, it is crazy there. And having lived in California for much of my life, I can agree and honestly tell you it is crazy there. However, the question that you need to ask about Jillian is she also part of the problem? And we'll talk about that more in a moment. So she may be able to recognize some of the things that are going on in California, and I want to look at that. And actually, I think she recognizes some of them very well. But then listen closely to what she says. And maybe what I'll do is I'll just play it and pause it a little bit and kind of talk about it as they go through. And side note, I do need to say this. You can, I clipped some of this, and I clipped it because there was some language in it that I just didn't want to put on my podcast. You can go and listen to the whole thing. It's all over social media. You can watch it. There's even a full-length YouTube or video somewhere. Feel free to watch that. Just note that if you watch it and go, oh, Matt didn't prepare me, that there's some rather choice language in here. Yes, there's rather choice language in this video, and I cut it out so you and I didn't have to listen to it. And I don't think, again, you can go and listen to the whole thing, just so you know I'm not taking things out of context. I don't think I am here. But if you want to go listen to the whole thing, you can. I don't think I changed the meaning of what she's saying. And I'm not even going to be frustrated with her. I think it's unfortunate. I don't think she quite understands what's going on. But just so you know, I wanted to be fair warning that I did clip this a little bit because I didn't want to expose you to all the language. Okay, let's listen to a little bit of this and then see what happens.
I grew up here. I'm a woman.
So here she's talking about California, just so everybody knows. So I grew up here. I'm a woman. Here we go.
A woman. My mom's a Jew.
All right, we're gonna rewind that because I just want to make sure we all get that. Okay, here we go.
I grew up here. I'm a woman. I'm a gay woman. My mom's a Jew. My dad's an Arab. I have a black kid. And believe it or not, my son is half Latin, even though he doesn't look like it. I hold 1 million cards in your game of woke victimology poker.
Okay, we're just going to pause there and say she gets it, right? She understands that there is an intersectional hierarchy. There's intersectional gymnastics that you earn points. We've talked about this. You can go back in the archives and listen to all the critical race theory stuff, woke stuff, in the critical race theory worldview. You get more points the more intersectional things you have. And she just noted them: gay, black, Jewish, whatever, and woman, and all those. And so the more that you have, the more intersectional you are. Ooh, that was a Freudian slip. And then you get more points. And so you have more cred in the culture, blah, 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 whatever. So she's recognizing that. And it's good that she's recognizing that, because many liberals just pretend that they don't understand this, and she's calling that out straight out, and that's important. So let's keep listening.
And when I leave California, maybe it's gone way too far. What was...
Okay, so she's like, but California's gone so crazy that, it's too crazy, and I gotta leave. Let's go back just a smidge while this person, this interviewer, is going to say a thing here. Here we go.
Maybe it's gone way too far. What was the line? Like what was it? Oh my God, I guess, girl, there's not enough time. And I actually take this line from Bill and Elon Musk, and they're like, I actually haven't changed. Yes. The world around me is shifting, and I haven't moved.
Okay, I gotta pause there and say, so I think she's talking about Bill Maher. We've played a little bit of him on the show here and there, and it's really important to understand what she's saying. What she's saying is, she's been in California. She has all these intersectional cards. She has all these intersectional points. She has chosen a lifestyle that is not the biblical lifestyle. She may or may not recognize what she's saying, but that's what she's saying, right? It's not traditional family. It's not, whatever. So she is also saying, I have not changed. So I've been liberal. I've been in this intersectional hierarchy, and I'm still in it. But California has gone so crazy that now it's too far. So see the spectrum in your mind. Like, understand what's happening here. It's okay that you're liberal. It's okay that you're leftist. It's okay that you're intersectional with all of these qualifications and all of these points along the map. But there is a point that's too far. So what is that point? And that's actually an astute question that the interviewer had asked. Let's hear more.
So some of these laws that are passing here are mind-boggling in relation to crime, protecting our kids. Like, we're decriminalizing everything, which arguably I would probably be okay with. But
okay, man. Listen to what's happening. So we're decriminalizing things, and that's okay, because I'd be okay with that. but only to a certain point. So like it's only okay to rob people to a certain point. If you don't know, and just to go back in time, right? California has made it legal, more or less, to rob up to $900, I don't remember, like $990 or whatever. It's under $1,000. Like if you steal from California, a store, if you steal something from a store that is under $1,000, you cannot be punished to the full extent of the law. Your crime is de-elevated. So is that okay? Is that the line? Or is it that, you know, sleeping on the street in a, wait, man, what's the word they say? They don't say homeless anymore, like home challenged or locationally challenged. I don't know. They have these other euphemisms. Anyway, if you're homeless on the street, that's fine. But like, if you're doing drugs on the street, maybe that's fine. Like, what's the level? What's the level of crime that's okay? Or perhaps I would suggest, maybe this is a more conservative view, how about we do no crime? How about we just say what a crime is and then we don't do the crime? Like, which is the more reasonable place? And remember her place. She's like, I haven't moved. I'm still the same. And I'm probably okay with reducing crime, just only to a certain extent. And now the extent is too far. We've gone over the cliff. Wherever the cliff was, we've gone over it. Let's keep hearing a little bit more.
We're not regulating any of it. I mean, I could be liberal. I could go there with you. But I grew up this way. Or the fact that a 12-year-old child can be put on off-label cancer drugs to irreparably change their body.
Okay. So we got to... So it's okay. Crime is okay to a point, but there's a point, whatever that random point is. And then she's saying the right thing. 12-year-olds should not be put on medication to stop them from having puberty, to potentially sterilize them. Sure, that's all terrible. And it's terrible to trans your kid medically at 12, but listen to this part.
Again, if my son came to me and said, Mom, my daughter, I think I'm trans, I'd say, okay, you know, like.
It's so sad. Like, I don't think she sees it. I don't think she sees it. And I've heard and talked to people like this. I've seen videos like this before where it's okay to have a little bit of crime, just not too much crime. It's okay to say, oh, my kid says they're a boy, but now they're a girl. That's okay. But we're not going to do the medication until...
You want to dress this way? You want me to call you whatever the heck you want me to address? Fine. Explore it. I love you. I'm cool. Like, do you, as long as we're safe. But we're not changing your body until it's fully developed. I'm sorry. Conversation's over. It's madness. It's madness to me.
So, right, do you see it? I just wanted to play this, and I hope I didn't interrupt it too much. You can go again and watch the full clip. Again, warning that there's some language in it. But just note, she says, if I have all these intersectional cards, I have all these different things. If I'm leaving California, it's just too bad. Now, what's too bad? Well, a little bit of crime's okay. A little bit of transgender madness, that's okay. I mean, you can dress however you want. I can call you whatever name you want. I'll use your pronouns. I'll do all that. But transitioning before you're 18, well, that's wildly like that's just inconceivable. We can't transition you before 18. Once you're 18, of course, yeah, that's fine because something magical happens when you're 18, and then you can choose to become a woman if you're a man or whatever, vice versa. But if you're 12, you can't choose that. And I'll go back again to this whole ideology. If you are a man, you are a man. There's no point in your life where that can change. And the same for a woman. But this ideology says, well, there is a point. And apparently that arbitrary point is 18. And again, in the arbitrary point of crime, I guess there's a point of crime that's just too much crime, but the amount of crime before that point is fine. And she says, you know, I've lived here. I've done this my whole life. We've done all this my whole life. I've been liberal. It's okay. And this is the problem. She may be able to recognize California's madness, and it is indeed madness. She is not able to recognize it is her very own worldview of liberal leftism that created this California in the first place. The things she's thinking, the things she is doing have made California the way it is. It has turned into policies. It has turned into laws. It has turned into culture that promotes the very thing that now she says is just too much. She wants to rewind it 5 years or 10 years or 15 years or whatever to go down the exact same path. We just want to permanently freeze things in the 90s because the 90s were liberal but not too liberal. So we just want to be mostly liberal but not all the way liberal. And they can't see. People like this cannot see the fire they started is now burning down the house. They just didn't want it to be this bad. They just thought, well, we want a little bit of fire to burn up the patriarchy and a little bit of fire to burn up God and the Bible. But we don't want to burn down the house. We just want to burn down the frame of the house. It's back to that that atheist that we looked at a few weeks ago that was like, I really like Christianity culturally. I really like singing the hymns. I really like Christmas carols and things, but I don't want any part of like the actual Christianity. I don't want to worship God or like read the Bible or do anything God says. I just want the hymns and stuff. And it's the same thing. Like this lady and many like her want the freedom that comes with Christianity without the way that Christianity orders your life. Because without that order, it is just chaos and lawlessness, the crime that she is referring to, and that is the way it goes. There is no middle. There's no middle you can live in that's just a little bit of crime, just a little bit of weird LGBTQ stuff. It's you have to know this road keeps going. It does keep going. And she likely, and I don't know where she's moving, and it doesn't really matter, but wherever she's going to move, she's going to say the same things. She's going to vote for the same things. She's going to live her life the same way. And the same result is going to happen every time. Liberals, leftists like this person, like Bill Maher, who she mentioned, they recognize the problem, but they don't understand this foundation that they're trying to create that leads to the very outcomes that all of a sudden they don't like. They take no responsibility for their very own role in it, and then they move from these deep, deep blue states into the red states and repeat the same mistakes. Changing Texas or wherever into early 2000s California, and it is not going to work at all. Okay, man, we're going a little bit of time, but we're going to do one more just because I feel like doing one more. We're going to do a Disney section. I don't know, you guys are probably tired of it. I'm tired of it. I don't really want to do a Disney section per se, but we're going to do a Disney section because I keep trying to hope. It's like something inside me, and I must be broken. I'm broken for sure, but I really want Disney to like turn it around. And every once in a while, I think, oh, they're going to turn it around this time, and then they don't. It's just a hot disaster, and that's what we've got here. So there's this new series, and let me back up and say, there was a really, really fun, family-friendly place to take your kids in Disneyland. I grew up in Southern California. I went to Disneyland at least once a year, sometimes many times a year, because for a Southern Californian, it was fairly inexpensive, at least when I was young, to go. Then, as a father, we got a season pass at least 1 year. Other years, we just went one time or 2 times. We brought the kids to Disneyland more times than I can count. However, that was admittedly a decade or 2 ago. It was a safe place, a fun place, a family-friendly place. Now, Disneyland is doing this. I'm going to turn down this volume just a little bit here. But if you cannot see, this is a parade sponsored by Disney in Disneyland, which is fronted by men dressed as women. And all of the characters are in lovely rainbow costumes. The buildings are in rainbow projection. Everything is rainbow. It's all full of pride. This is a sponsored pride event at Disneyland, sponsored by Disneyland. And so this is what we have now. This is the way things go. This is the way Disney is. This is the way it's going to be. And you just have to know that this is the new Disneyland. You cannot go to Disney for a family-friendly experience. You just never know what's going to happen. I showed you just a little bit ago this guy. I don't have the picture right now, but you have this guy who is in a mustache in the kids' bippity boppity boutique or whatever, like selling dresses, princess dresses to kids. I mean, like, this is a thing that you probably will encounter in Disneyland. There are going to be men dressed as women marching in the parade. So go to Disney at your own I was going to say peril. I mean, just know this is what you're going to encounter, and it is not necessarily family friendly anymore. And at the very least, if you do go and you still want to go, you need to have the conversations with your kid for when they see a dude with a mustache in a dress, because they probably will. Meanwhile, in Disney movie making, the Acolyte series, which is apparently a prequel in the Star Wars world, now has a lesbian impregnation ceremony of witches. Those are a lot of words that don't even make sense together, but apparently that's what's going on. I'm going to show you some of this in a moment. I may try to mute the audio or show it. I always get in trouble when I play Disney things, so we'll see if this stays up in video or not. I just never know anymore. But this is a news outlet called The Wrap saying, "We are happy to report the Acolyte is, quote, arguably the gayest Star Wars yet," end quote. Happy Pride Month. This is where we are. So it just keeps getting weirder. There are apparently all of the Jedis or Acolytes, which are Sith. I'm not going to get into the lore. I just don't care anymore. They're all women, and so, as you know, biologically, even though this is a fake story, you need a man and a woman to have a baby. Okay, listen, biology. Okay, so this is what we're gonna see in a moment. We're gonna watch a part of one of these episodes where they do a ceremony to create a baby in the women, because you can't have a baby if there's only women. I'm probably driving this point home too much, but this is the new Disney show, and I don't know. And this, I gotta ask, like, are Disney shows for kids? Is this a show for kids? Is this a show for adults? It's on Disney Plus. Like, I don't know anymore. I just don't know anymore. Disney has openly said they're trying to make everything gay. That's what they said, and the news outlets are saying they may have been mission accomplished. This is the gayest one yet. So this is where they're going. And I just want to back up and say, as humans, we are creatures of story. One thing I really like about movies, books, is the story. I like having a good story, a good character arc. I weigh every movie I see in this vein. Like, how is the story going? And of course, but that is not the reason, but is a reason that I really like the Bible, because the Bible is, of course, the greatest story ever told. It's the story of God's love through his one and only son, John 3:16. Even C.S. Lewis, the famed author of Narnia and many other great books, discovered the quote-unquote myth of Christ. He talked about it as a myth, but you have to understand, C.S. Lewis is not talking about it as a myth that is not real. He's talking about it as a myth that is a story, and a really great story that points you to a deeper truth. C.S. Lewis said it this way, quote, "The story of Christ is a true myth." This is him talking. "A myth working on us in the same way as other myths, but with this difference that it really happened. And one must be content to accept it in the same way, remembering it is God's myth where the others are men's myths. Like the pagan stories are God expressing him through the minds of poets, using images, while Christianity is God expressing himself through what we call real things." End quote. So this is a really important point to grasp. That might have been a little bit deep, but I hope you can understand that. He's arguing Christianity is a myth, but it is a true myth, and there is truth in the story of God. Then he says that you can find truth in other stories. In fact, he would probably argue that you can find God's truth in most, if not all, stories, but it's in bits and pieces. So we get the full truth in the Bible, we get bits and pieces of true things in other stories. I think Star Wars is actually a really good example of this. Now, this analogy breaks down fairly quickly, but there are elements of Christianity in Star Wars. Just look at this picture of Return of the Jedi. You have Star Wars, a story of a child who is born of a virgin, immaculately conceived by a mysterious godlike force. Does that ring any bells for you? Yes, I know the analogy is not perfect and we could dissect it and destroy it, but in point, there are moments in this story that are true truth. This godlike force conceives immaculately a boy who becomes the chosen one, who is going to be the savior. If you watch some of the movies, they even use this very language. This chosen one will save the galaxy, And he is the one. So again, it falls apart pretty quickly, and that's not the point. Lewis points out there are bits and pieces in stories. It's not the whole thing. Yeah, there's a bunch of Buddhism and Hinduism in the story and a bunch of other things. But what I think you can say is the Christian upbringing, the Christian childhood, the Christian culture that George Lucas was born in seems to have had an effect on the storyline of the first couple of his movies, at least the first couple. Now, here we go. We've fast forward to this newest iteration, and we've already looked at, and in the last episode, I think I played you the clip. I'm not going to play it again, but the creators, I'm just laughing. I can't even do it. The creators of this new Acolyte story intentionally tried to make it gay. They literally said that. So in this story, Christianity is flipped on its head, and it seems intentionally so. Two lesbians hijack the Force to immaculately conceive a pair of twins so they can take over the, this is my words now, evil white patriarchal Jedi Order. Because it seems like that's what they're trying to do. And that's not even hyperbole. I think that's what they're trying to do. So here's where I'm going to play the video. This may or may not make it onto the YouTubes. Please, YouTubes, like me. But here is the song.
Power of one. The power of two. The power of many.
Terrifying.
The power of one. The power of two. The power of many.
Okay, that's like enough of that. Anyway, so what you see, and it's songs. So there's a song, there's this crazy song playing, and it's apparently witches that are some form of life form in Star Wars, and these LGBTQ AIP hashtag plus dollar sign squiggly emoji witches, which apparently also are lesbians because there's only women, are worshiping this moon planet thing to impregnate themselves through this demonic chant song. And I don't think that's hyperbole. I think that's exactly what was happening here. So this is what is happening. I was reading about this, doing some research, and the website boundingintocomics.com said, in sadly but unsurprisingly delivering on previous whispers, the third episode of The Acolyte has made an absolutely massive, ostensibly identity politics motivated change to one of the franchise's most pivotal pieces of Disney lore. In current Star Wars canon, the power to create life via direct manipulation of the Force is nearly impossible. I'm going to pause there and say, right. So we only know of it happening once, and that was the Immaculate Conception of Anakin, who became the savior of the universe. But then they're trying to fix this. So now, going on this website, the honor now belongs to the newly introduced leader of an unknown band of Force-sensitive witches who, blah, 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 whatever, Anastasia used the Force to bring two embryos within her fellow witch mother. You're like, why are we reading this? It's going to land. Just give me a minute. So this pair of twins would be birthed, and they would be serious protagonists. Okay, listen. Here's what I want to talk about. This is the theology. Disney's theology is flipped on its head. Star Wars was about one person who was going to save the universe in kind of a Christ-like way. Again, I mentioned it's not one for one. Yes, I know. However, it was much closer to the God story than whatever, I was going to say the H-E-L-L word here, this is. So Disney flips the theology on its head, and these two lesbians hijack the Force, conceiving children for their own designs, saying, here's what I want to do. There will be done. And I know I'm probably stretching it, but that's exactly what's happening here. They're saying, not your will be done, God, but my will be done, which of course is the exact opposite of the Lord's Prayer in Matthew 6. And yeah, I know that's probably a stretch, but that's what I'm seeing in this. And so this is what I show you, current events from a Christian perspective. This is a current series from a Christian perspective. And it is just, it's not only not Christian, it is fully anti-Christian. It is exactly the opposite of Christian, and that's why you need to know what's happening here. It's not just that as a silly Star Wars series that you shouldn't watch because it's garbage. It's that it literally is showing you anti-Christian things. It's saying, I can make whatever I want happen through the power and force of my will, rather than Christ, who says, Not my will, but thy will be done. Hopefully you see this. And of course, it all comes from Marxist worldviews and oppressor and oppressed dynamics. Yes, we've talked about that. Critical race theory, other critical theories. But you just have to understand this is the reality of what everything is going on, not only in the media, not only at Disney, but in the Star Wars universe that used to be, at least at some level, kind of Christ-like. The account Wall Street Silver on X wrote, "This series streaming is very woke. The main character has 2 mothers. The main Jedi characters are black and Asian, no white men. 3, the only speaking role for white men is prisoners on a prison ship." So this is all just woke. Yes, it is all Marxist, but it is anti-Christian. The sadder part of this is that Disney has been in the past very creative. They've been very creative as a company, and they just have lost that completely. And all they have apparently is to redo old intellectual property, aka Star Wars, and do it really poorly. They do old animated shows and redo them in real life with changes that are just terrible. And now the old animated shows, if you haven't noticed, have trigger warnings on them saying there's sensitive, super sensitive things in this, like families that are men and women and children, or whatever the sensitivity, like there are. Go and look if you have Disney Plus still. There are sensitivity warnings on some of these old animated shows because they're so scared they're going to watch it and actually just be normal. And I'll land it on this. Remember Sleeping Beauty, and I talked about Sleeping Beauty and some of the other fairy tales before, because fairy tales by nature, at least the old ones, actually were moral tales. And as C.S. Lewis points out, some of those myths point to real truth. So here, this one may be too on the nose, but just look at this. If you're just listening, I will describe it for you. It is the prince slaying the dragon. So Sleeping Beauty's prince used the sword of truth, that's literally the name of the sword, to slay the dragon who saved the princess and all the people in the kingdom. So the one true chosen person using the sword of truth slayed the dragon, evil thing, and saved the whole universe. I mean, that is on the nose of biblical reality in a fairy tale, and now we're in some weird witchy lesbo incarnation ceremony. We'll end it with Revelation 12:9. The great dragon was hurled down, that ancient serpent called the devil or Satan. All of this, apparently and sadly, is a long time gone culturally and artistically, and this new weirdness is just a visual representation of the harsh reality that we now live in. Now, I don't want to leave you on that note because that's just horribly depressing. And I don't want you to be depressed because I don't think you should be depressed. I think there is a solution. It's just not an easy one. The solution is simple, but it is exponentially more difficult. Christians, leaders, pastors, Jesus-following businessmen need to stand up and create the alternative. They need to create it in media, business, any area they can, anything they work in. These faith-based leaders, businessmen, businesses need to create. However, the difficulty, of course, is going to lie in the market. Multi-billion-dollar companies like Disney and the Disney franchise have every single resource they possibly need to push out this garbage over and over and over again, even if nobody watches it and everybody hates it. But the rest of us have limited funds, limited reach to exercise our God-given creativity, but we should. Which is why, even though I don't know if anybody's even listening to this at this point, I hope some of you are, and if you are, if you want to share this, that's helpful because I have limited funds and limited resources and limited reach to exercise my God-given creativity, but I'm going to do it in this as long as I have breath and as long as God keeps providing me opportunities, because the rewards for following God are going to be far greater, some might even say eternal. I'm Matt Odegaard, and this is Church Public. If this was helpful to you at all, go ahead and leave a like, a review, a comment, send it to a friend, leave a 5-star review, write something. If I'm still up on the YouTubes, who knows what's going to happen. If you want to go to churchpublic.com and support, I really appreciate that too. God bless you, love you, and we'll see you soon.